Everyone for taking time out to join us today. We've got a great session planned for you. As the title suggests, we're going to be talking about how we believe delivering brand building channels programmatically will drive better results for your performance channels, and also why we believe that this is particularly crucial as we start to see recovery and a return to normal-ish life. I'm joined today by Mark, our Head of Client Services, and Sam, our Head of Media and Partnerships at Bench. And we're also delighted to have two of our fabulous clients, Scott Forrest, the Global Director of eCommerce from earphone manufacturer Nuheara, and Bryan Wilmot, the CMO at share trading platform Stake. So hi guys. So before we get started, I should let you know that the recording will be sent to you all along with some key takeaways collateral. And if you wish to ask questions, with the Q&A is enabled, so send them through. We'll endeavour to get to those at the end of the session, but if for any reason we don't and we run out of time, please leave your name there and we'll make sure that we come back to you following the session. So today's purpose is to unpack what we believe are the opportunities and the challenges and also the solutions facing marketers as we head into recovery. You'll hear a little bit from us, and then we shall talk to both Scott and Bryan about how they've utilised programmatic branding channels in order to drive results for their respective businesses. So let's start by talking about the opportunity and firstly look at the ad market specifically. So after a relatively slow start to 2021, by the time we hit mid this year, all predictions were that there was almost double-digit growth for total ad spend, albeit trailing about 5% behind 2019. And this was being driven by digital with some TV. Other channels were starting to recover, but not to the sort of the 2019 levels. And we're expected to take a little bit longer to get back on track. And that's kind of, your out of home and cinema channels. So these predictions at the time were based on short lockdown assumptions, which we now know have not been the case. But despite extended lockdowns, the fact we have a clear pathway to freedom means a healthy, buoyant recovery is certainly expected. In fact, if we look at the more recent data from the SMI, in August, we can see that the recovery is well and truly underway. Latest ad expenditure figures for the first 8 months of this year are actually up on 2019 by 1.2%. And ad spend has bounced back despite the lockdowns, extended lockdowns that we've seen across Australia. We can also see with the SMI forward pacings data that the trend will continue. And that this growth has been predominantly driven by TV and digital. So TV bookings clearly soared off the back of the Olympics, but there was also a pretty hefty increase in the digital streaming that was accompanying that. And the digital growth, which remains a key driver as we move now into the final part of this calendar year, has been driven by very well documented increases in eCommerce and online transactions, alongside huge upticks in digital video consumption and internet consumption in general, which are all being driven by the changing consumer habits that we've seen, and we'll go into that a little bit more in detail later. So another big driver alongside the Olympics has been the COVID messaging, and this saw the government sector become the third largest category in the month. The auto category also showed evidence of its recovery. And then streaming TV services are another standout, pushing the in-home entertainment category up alongside things like food delivery services. So no sort of real surprises there. By contrast, travel, live entertainment, tourism, they've been blunted by these extended New South Wales, Victorian lockdowns. But, as we can see from the data only last week, as New South Wales started to ease restrictions, these categories have already seen major consumer spending, at least. So overall, more than $1 billion in ad spend has actually returned to the market over this period, with the total up around just shy of 30%. So alongside the ad market, a key indicator for our recovery story is consumer sentiment. So if we look at the Westpac Consumer Sentiment Index, we can see that the data tells us an equally pleasing story. So whilst consumer sentiment hit its lowest point all year in August, it fell 4.4% versus July. It's still higher than it was pre-pandemic and well above what we saw last year, those deep negative lows after throughout last year's national lockdown, I should say. And in fact, in September, the consumer sentiment increased by 2%. And this sort of resilience of consumer sentiment, according to the Westpac report, is remarkable. You know, and by all accounts, it's the improving vaccination situation that is a key factor behind these results. And so this all points to a healthy recovery as vaccine levels continue to rise across the country, and you know, we're well placed to snap back once restrictions ease. So if sentiment is high and appears only to be improving, from what is considered an already, you know, decent base, do consumers have the means or the money to spend? And I do think that this needs a little bit of a drum roll because it blew my mind a little bit. But according to the AFR back in July, we were sitting on a 140 billion post-pandemic war chest, whereas the Australian Bureau of Statistics now have that number at 190 billion, which is about 12% of annual household income. And to put that in perspective, pre-pandemic, this number sits around sort of the 4.7 to 5.3 mark, depending on, you know, what data you're looking at. And so households have squirreled away more than 190 billion since the start of coronavirus. And it does seem, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, that they are ready to unleash it in an economy boosting wave of consumption when things start to get back to normal. So all of this certainly bodes well for our post-pandemic economic recovery. And all of these elements suggest that the recovery or spending boom that we're about to see in the lead up to Christmas will most likely continue well into 2022, as we see more certainty, more confidence, as we all start to get more comfortable and more accepting of living alongside the virus. And so this heady mix of, you know, consumer confidence combined with unprecedented savings brings me to revenge spending. So what do we mean by revenge spending? So in the US, when vaccines started turning the tide of COVID spread and things started to return to normal, the phrase revenge spending was coined. It's actually described as, this is the best definition that I've found, an unbridled, if not angry, spending on frivolous consumer goods. A take that COVID sort of attitude, if you like. It kind of makes sense, right? I'm sure many of us have a little of the revenge spending feeling coming over us as things start to feel like we're coming out the other end, particularly across Australia. And actually at home here in Australia, everywhere you look at headlines, depending, you know, across different categories, you know, there are headlines that are saying that this sort of revenge spending phenomenon is certainly going to be a thing here in Australia. In fact, if we look at last week's Freedom Day spending in New South Wales, according to the AFR, a staggering 100 million was spent at shops, which is an enormous, you know, nearly a 200% increase on the week before. We spent just shy of 13 million actually in restaurants, pubs and bars, which was up from $1 million the week before. We were all getting our hair done, so it was 5 million spent at hairdressers and barbers. Some of us still trying to get in there actually, because I think most people were booked up. And then clothing was a tenfold increase from 1 to 10 million over that period. So, you know, it's certainly signalling a strong remainder of the year and a strong 2022. It's no real surprise actually when you consider a survey from Shopper Media that was released last month, which was sort of all around determining whether this frenzy of spending was going to actually occur. And, you know, these guys found that, you know, consumers are ready to rebound. You know, there's a driving desire to restore control, normalcy. And then it's providing a unique moment for brands to really sort of lean in and respond with products and services that meet this intention. Almost half of consumers are planning a significant purchase when restrictions ease, and nearly a third indicate they would be spending, you know, 500 to 2,000 per purchase. So, and this is then further backed up by Roy Morgan consumer confidence data, which supports these findings, with around 35% of Australians saying how it's a good time to buy major household items. So these signals are certainly suggesting that we are poised and ready to make up for some lost time. So if the following 3 to 6 months are absolutely key for marketers, either to drive exponential growth or just simply to ensure that business recovery, regardless of sector, how as marketers do you turn this into real measurable growth for your business, and you know, where are you best spending your money? And so whilst COVID has knocked us all around, it's also upended many of our usual habits and activities. You know, and as a result, and I'm sure we're not at all surprised by the fact that digital media has really seen the benefits of the past 18 months. Digital consumption across TV, radio, podcasts is at an all-time high across all demographics, along with a huge uptick of online shopping and retail, again, across all demographics. You know, so traditional brand building channels bought digitally hold a huge opportunity or potential for marketers. Digital content consumption itself is up 15% on 2019. We've got more video screens per household than ever before. We've been exceptionally busy buying laptops and smartphones and connected TVs and consoles and tablets, which is clearly fueling this sort of digital consumerism. And this combined, when you think what the out-of-home industry has gone through and having now gone through their own digital transformation, also means that the very last of the traditional brand building channels can now be bought digitally and more specifically programmatically. And this, this mass move by consumers and the industry to digital means that marketers can really start to see true cross-channel relationships and impacts and really reap the benefits of what digital and programmatic can bring to the party, really. And so to wrap all of this together, combining positive consumer sentiment, the fact that consumers have a lot of money and certainly have savings and are very much ready to spend it, the importance of the time of the year that we're going into, plus this major shift in digital media consumption. And you can see it's a very crucial time for marketers. Knowing where to focus is going to require careful consideration. And I'm going to hand over to Mark, and he'll talk us through what he believes these should be, and particularly as we start to see the recovery, really start to take shape. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Esther. So what does this all mean when it comes to marketing, or what is the most important time of year for many? One thing we know for sure is that you'll be wanting to maximize your share of voice to outshout your competition, but it's not quite as simple as spending more, and you might not have the budget to do so anyhow. We know through the work of Binet and Field and the long and the short of it, the importance of a combination of branding and performance to drive results both in the long and the short term. It's especially true if you haven't been very active in market for a while. As touched on by Esther, the recovery period will certainly flow into next year, so branding will be important for longer term success and business growth. We also know through Mark Ritson and with data from Ehrenberg Bass, the importance of maintaining branding efforts through a downturn when sales are tougher to come by. Brands that advertised throughout came out of the other side stronger than those that didn't. So we know that brands that have been out of market recently are going to have a tougher job to bounce back. The same theory applies to falling back on performance channels when budgets are restricted. It's very likely to cause a longer term downward trend. This really ties into the impact of branding on lower funnel outcomes. Whatever marketing model you use, whether that be the standard funnel or the McKinsey loop, they all point to the fact that if you don't have audiences considering your products or services, then you're going to struggle with your performance outcomes. For instance, if you haven't got people considering and thus searching for your brand, you won't have the ability to spend much on your branded search efforts. And although this isn't always obvious from the typical attribution models that advertisers use, which tend to be predominantly last touch or similar, there is a big influence from branding channels on your performance activity, whether that be search, social, or display. I am very familiar with a number of examples of this from clients I've worked with in the past. Unfortunately, we'll be talking to Scott from Nuheara later, who will take you through his experience of this. So I'll just come on to how recently Les Binet released a piece of work around the correlations between share of voice versus share of market and the indicators within share of search. So just to be clear here, we're not talking about your impression share of paid search in Google Ads. And this isn't something that can be achieved by overspending in search. This is the share of total searches in your market, which can be looked at on a basic level using Google Trends data, or on a more sophisticated level with attribution technology. It's something that I don't think many marketers are looking at right now. He found that in order to increase your share of search within your competitive set, your effective share of voice needs to exceed your share of market. As you can see in this graph, there is a direct correlation between your effective share of voice and share of search, which doesn't come from throwing money at paid search. If your share of voice drops relative to your share of the market, so will your share of search. For example, if like LG, you have a 16% share of the TV category, you should be looking to exceed 16% in your share of voice versus your competition. So he also found that share of search was a leading indicator of change in your share of market. In the case of LG, they stopped their brand spend in late 2008. And as you can see in this graph, their share of search started dropping ahead of their share of market. You can see that there was roughly 4 months before their share of market started dropping. However, it's worth noting that this lead time does vary by industry and correlates with the purchase cycle. For instance, with cars, this can be up to 12 months. This again underlies the importance of longer-term branding. For me, the most prevalent word here is effective share of voice. Since this really isn't just a case of spending more, it's definitely possible to have a higher effective share of voice with a lower spend. You just need to be smarter with your marketing dollars and minimize your wastage. Now, there's a number of intelligent ways you're able to achieve this. A few of these include flexibility, so that's ensuring you can move your budgets towards what's driving the best result, making sure you're not hitting your points of diminishing returns, not putting all of your eggs in one basket, and also testing, learning, and evolving the strategy. Then targeted branding, which is control of where your ads appear to a broad but targeted audience, appearing within the most relevant contexts and the best locations for your supply and your audience. Also making sure that you have strong brand creatives suited for the platform that it's in. Then we come on to connecting the dots. This is linking all your channels together. So making sure you're present as much as possible on that consumer journey. Also, it's storytelling through those ads. Then onto visibility. This is really making sure that you can see all of your marketing in one place. So thus reducing admin in favor of actionable insights. These areas are where programmatic really comes into its own to help you make the most of every dollar spent and pivot your business. I'll hand over to Sam now to unpack this further for you.
So Esther gave us a bit of an insight into what that post-pandemic recovery looks like. And as noted, all signs are pointing to positivity. Consumers will likely be spending, Australia will likely be out of lockdown, and advertisers will be back out in market and helping to contribute to the recovery of the media industry. And then what Mark took us through was a few of the challenges that will be faced by marketers and the importance of branding. And then what I want to do now is unpack that programmatic branding part specifically. So I guess the first question is, what do we mean by programmatic branding? It's simply just the traditional branding channels that we all know and love, however, bought and delivered via programmatic technology now that we have the ability to do so. And why do we think that they're crucial for recovery? I guess it goes back to Mark's point that he just outlined, is that they're really important for longer term sustained growth. If we take a quick look at where we often go for short-term wins, looking at search and social, for example, the question for marketers becomes, what happens when the sales or leads in these environments start to slow down, or what happens when they start to become too expensive? So how do we make sure that you keep momentum and maintain your good results? These environments aren't really one in which a brand can just simply pump more budget and keep the positive ROIs flowing. As we all know, social media buying has points of diminishing returns against your in-market audiences, in which you'll eventually see CPAs rise over time. And when we hone in on search, we know that it'll often lead to the best ROI performance, but it will only capture consumers who are already in your sales funnel. So I guess the answer then lies in branding media. So when we dovetail back to programmatic branding, it's really important to note that the programmatic ecosystem has evolved incredibly quickly. It's no longer just a performance channel on a media plan. It's now just simply a way of transacting all digital media, including your branding channels. And when we look at the value of digital branding, it's super important to break down the audience growth on those channels specifically. So Esther mentioned earlier that the latest Iab Trends show that digital media and content consumption is at an all-time high. Consumers are online more than ever, and this is happening across all media channels. But what I want to do is just quickly break that down and give some top-line stats that show that growth. When we look at CTV and video specifically, got about 89% of online adults that are consuming video content online. And interestingly, all demographics are increasing their usage. So when looking at that particularly hard to reach 18 to 34 and 35 to 44 audiences, they're definitely growing. And what I find super interesting is that 55 plus audience is being super engaged as well. So 32% have started or increased their viewership in recent months. In total, connected TV audiences are up about 26% year on year, which just shows huge audience growth. It gives marketers the chance to advertise to highly scaled and highly engaged audiences on that biggest screen in the house. When we move to audio, like listening to digital radio has skyrocketed through COVID. It's become the kind of companion, I guess you could say, in the house for many working from home. Programmatic audio is the is the digital streaming of these stations, the catch-up content that can be consumed, and one of the real growth categories of digital audio, podcasting. 69% of Australian adults listen to audio content online in 6 months to June 2020, and current data shows that this has trended upwards again this year. In fact, 63% of Australian adults had listened to at least one music streaming service over the last 7 days. So again, we've got massive growth across a channel that was traditionally much less digitized. Now offering that opportunity for brands to access this media, to advertise to consumers that are highly engaged, usually headphones in and blocking out all other noise. Now, when we look at out of home, traditional out of home impact of COVID has been pretty huge. The digitization of this space has been rapid in the last 18 months or so, and PwC suggests that programmatic is likely going to be a major contributor to the recovery of this industry specifically. With the imminent inclusion of media, programmatic digital out of home will reach about 93% of all Australians. Now, we spoke about the value that digital out of home could provide in our last webinar. It's a bit of a personal favorite of mine, and the branding opportunity that this creates for advertisers is pretty incredible. So we can see that the audience is there, which is one of the most important pieces of value that can be gained by using these channels for your brand strategy. But why do we believe that buying these channels programmatically drives a heap more value than more traditional transactions? Well, we kind of got to think about what Mark spoke about, that need for flexibility, the need for a targeted approach, connecting the dots, and visibility. We need to think about the challenges that traditional buying mechanisms create around those factors specifically. So first, let's take a quick look at flexibility. You can just build there, please. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right. Given there are societal changes that are happening incredibly quickly regarding lockdowns, consumer spending, shifts in media consumption trends, and marketing flexibility, it's pretty understandable that marketers are nervous about locking in plans with their agencies and their media partners too early to secure that bigger ticket branding media that brands have traditionally implemented in their marketing strategies. The easiest way of describing the value that a marketer can obtain by delivering media programmatically is the ability to control your media buy and be flexible when it comes to a range of factors such as creative messaging, media access, and targeting. Marketers no longer have to lock themselves into those traditionally rigid deals and can now react to market changes with speed, with flexibility, and with efficiency. So imagine a scenario in which a marketer has locked in a national deal with a number of out-of-home media owners for a product launch in Q4. By transacting your media programmatically, marketers have the control to tactically run digital out of home in areas that will create the most impact, so states that aren't locked down, while having the ability or flexibility to shift budget between channels. The example here is to shift digital out of home budgets into lockdown areas, to other awareness channels in which people will be consuming media indoors, such as Beaver. So having the flexibility to react to change while accessing high quality brand building channels that will create the most impact is your key to success, and it's super achievable. Now, the next factor in which we believe it's important to transact your media programmatically is that the impact of your budget can be maximized by being targeted in your approach. As Mark mentioned earlier, to improve your effective share of voice, you don't need to be the loudest one in the room, but you do need to be one of the smartest. We know that audiences are flocking to digital to consume media, and what that does is provide a layer of data that simply cannot be utilized when buying media in any other way. I'm not saying that you can't be targeted when executing on a more traditional branding buy across broadcast TV, audio, or out of home. You absolutely can. But now we have this ecosystem in which we can isolate audiences based on the content that people consume online, what they're interested in, what they do on their mobile devices, and based on things like movement patterns. And this allows us to isolate your target audiences and overlay those audiences across all digital branding channels that have been mentioned to ensure that your money isn't wasted on serving ads to people that are unlikely to convert at all. So when you add in the value of flexibility and control, you can dial up budget and dial down budget across channels that will create the most impact in areas that will create the most impact for you and your brand. Now, the output there is highly targeted reach across your most valuable audiences. Some of the work that we've partnered with Stake on through Bryan really brings this to light, so he'll take us through that shortly. Now, one of the key reasons that this targeted approach helps to drive performance efforts ties into the next piece of value that transacting media programmatically provides, and that's using data to connect the dots better than ever before. Now, connecting the dots is a pretty damn loose phrase, so I'll try and unpack that a little bit now for everyone. When looking at connecting the dots, the first thing that I like to look at is something that's not really possible when transacting media in a more traditional fashion, and that's having the ability to link your channels together where possible. For example, a nice and basic strategy when buying media programmatically is to set up your campaign in the one place, link your branding channels together by putting a frequency cap over the top of it, and that will give you the ability to maximize your reach against the target audiences that you've previously isolated, extending your budget as far as possible against this audience by capping it so you don't blast consumers with the same ad. It's a super simple strategy, but one that's really effective to maximize your budget and minimize your wastage. Another piece of linking value stems from the collection of audiences. So having the ability to collect audiences of consumers being exposed to your digital branding activity and retargeting them with more pointy performance-driven media. When doing this, you're starting to get a little bit more advanced in your strategy. You're generating the ability to storytell through your creative strategy, and you're bringing more potential customers into your sales funnel. All the while, you're driving more cost-efficient results lower down the funnel. Now, whether that be sales, leads, or search results. This is something that Scott will bring to life shortly in regards to his marketing strategy at Nuheara and the value that it drives in his business specifically as well. To provide a couple of typical examples of how this might work, a marketer could run a brand building campaign, sending a brand focused message to their target audiences on BVOD, targeting all devices, including the connected TV in the household. Using programmatic tech available to us, we can collect the audiences that have been exposed to the campaign and retarget them with a more pointy product focused message across lower funnel display activity. Gives us the ability to create awareness, connect the dots, storytell, and most importantly, create that more cost efficient sales impact lower down the funnel. I said out of home was my favorite, so I'll provide a nice little example of how you can connect the dots now and start to create some real tangible user journeys across those channels specifically as well. Without programmatic tech, you could still get loads of value from running out of home, but by transacting it programmatically, you could really supercharge those efforts. We've now got the ability to run a targeted out of home campaign, isolating audiences based on where they visit to plan out your screen strategy. And then perhaps the coolest piece of value that can be provided is by using mobile location technology to collect the audiences that are exposed to your digital out of home campaign and retarget them across other channels to enhance your sales efforts. For example, collecting the device IDs of consumers being exposed, uploading them to Facebook, and targeting these new audiences in a social environment, which we know helps to generate sales results. Now, the last point that Mark made was in regards to the challenge of visibility. So super important when it comes to understanding the data behind your media buy, generating insights, and then turning those insights into action. Quite simply, having all of the data in one place to analyze it is massive when it comes to efficiency and decision-making speed. So when running a more traditional branding campaign, it is a very real possibility that you would book your campaign, receive an end of campaign report from each individual media owner, analyze each of those reports, and then use the insights to inform future campaign strategy. When running the campaign programmatically, you centralize that aspect of your workload, which effectively gives you time back to spend on other strategies. It's important to have a real-time source of truth in which you can buy branding media across all major media owners, pulling the data into a single dashboard, and then using that to not only inform future campaign strategy, but also inform optimization of the campaign while it's in flight. This means you can analyze the data, understand which branding channels or specific media owners creating the most impact on your lower funnel efforts, or which is generating you the most highly targeted reach, and use that to continually maximize the return on your ad spend and drive more and more cost-efficient results for the business. Sounds like such a logical step, but having the ability to see all your campaign data in a single source cannot be understated in terms of the efficiency and value that it provides when it comes to effective budget decision-making. So to reiterate the major points that I've made so far there, it's that search and social alone will not drive sustained growth. It's that people are consuming more and more digital media than ever before, which gives brands the opportunity to access engaged consumers at scale within digital environments. Now we're in a period of recovery, so we need to look at how we can diversify our marketing strategy to get more awareness of our brand and products, and then to supercharge your performance efforts. To do that, we need to invest in branding, but more traditional and rigid approaches to branding can be impacted by different changes in the market, often outside of our control. So to combat that, get control of your branding strategy by buying media programmatically. Avoid locked-in deals and gain efficiency when buying this media. Improve your flexibility to react to changes in the market and be smart with your branding. filling your funnel by isolating your desired audiences and extending your reach across them. Connect your dots where possible to keep consumers engaged and to support your lower funnel activities, and ensure that you've got the efficiency and the visibility of your results to make speedy and intelligent optimization decisions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sam. And we will change gears a little bit now. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Sam and Mark. We'll chat now with Scott first. So, Scott, firstly, thanks for joining us. Sorry about the technical issues earlier. So, Scott, as the Global Director of eCommerce for Nuheara, maybe you could start by just telling us a little bit about Nuheara and, you know, how your role and your sort of approach to marketing within the business.
Sure. Nuheara is a ASX-listed personal hearing device maker. We made the world's first truly wireless earbuds, but ours are a bit special. They have hearing aid technology in them. At the moment, we're transitioning from a consumer electronics company to a medical device maker as we move towards the serving the over-the-counter hearing aid market that's just opening up in the USA. I'm responsible for e-commerce and digital marketing globally, and we're transitioning as well from a pure sort of D2C direct-to-consumer model to selling in 7 regions around the world to a much more omni-channel marketing operation, selling through large retail partners like Best Buy in the USA.
Awesome, thank you. And so, in relation to the topics that we've been covering today, so around, you know, using branding channels and delivering them programmatically to be a bit more smarter with your approach, can you tell me a little bit more about the things that helped shape your plans and approach to digital advertising over the last sort of 12 months?
Sure. I mean, the big aha moment for me was when we saw, we did a bit of a test early in the year in Australia. We added broadcast video on demand, BVOD, and we were looking specifically for a brand uplift in Google search of our core brand terms. And what we did with that was, rather than just showing one ad that was product-based and then a second ad that's the same, we sequenced the ads and the messaging so that somebody that saw the first product ads then got more detailed product ads, then some testimonial videos, and then the last videos I'd see in that sequence were conversion-based. And that's something that's very difficult to do through any traditional media channels.
Absolutely. So talking about that, you know, so I know obviously we worked with you on that and we broadened that channel mix, you know, you diversified, you know, we very much what we've spoken about today, we implemented with alongside you guys, you know, so, you know, what are the benefits that you saw from broadening that strategy and the impact that you saw on search, etc.?
So we're already running pretty successful search and social media campaigns ourselves, but they can be maxed out pretty easily, especially in small markets like Australia and New Zealand. Search is constrained by how many people are actually searching for a solution to something that we can provide. And with Facebook, the changes around iOS 14 and 14.5, we could see would face real headwinds, even for businesses like ours that were using the Facebook API. On top of that, we've got really narrow target audience of males 45 to 65 with mild to moderate hearing challenges, and they're really hard to target in traditional digital channels. However, we always need to fill the top of the funnel, and the work we did with Bench certainly helped.
And so obviously the big question is, how did it go and what were the results and what did you see off the back of that? And then also it would be great if you can also touch on the fact on how you isolated that, or how you know that it was the addition and that diversification that actually was driving those results.
Sure. So we ran a test in a really specified period. We had data from Google and Facebook, and specifically Google search, that we could see the previous year and the year before what the level of search was for specific terms and search for brand terms. When we added BVOD to it, we could measure the increase in our core brand search terms like Nuheara, IQ Buds, and other key product searches. The results were, well, hard to talk about the results. You know, last financial year, the company increased revenue over 500%. And certainly some of the work that we did in this area helped. We're running in New Zealand at the moment, and I've seen a massive uplift in branded search there since we've been running that BVOD campaign. We're also starting in the USA with a really focused strategy. It's a massive market for a small business like ours. So we want to target geos that we know we really perform in already. So targeting right down to city, even a suburb level. We're also targeting specific avatars. We have a lot of customers sending us testimonial reviews that are serving military personnel or veterans. And we can overlay that type of targeting with our demographic targeting and geographic targeting even around military bases. So that's where we're heading next.
I was just going to say, so, you know, you saw that, so you saw a huge uptick in Australia because you actually isolated Australia as well, didn't you? And we added BVOD and TV with it, and online video within Australia. I saw the search terms increase, which increased sales. And then obviously now we're rolling that. I was going to say, that was going to be my final question to you, actually, was sort of around, you know, obviously search and social will continue to play a major role in your marketing plan, but based on what the learnings you've gotten over the last sort of 6 to 12 months and now launching in a new market, you know, what's the future holding for you? But I should imagine from what you've just said, it's the actual channels you'll be using. So branding's here to stay. Like, what's the mix looking like?
The next big thing for us is supporting channel partners like Best Buys. You know, they're the largest consumer electronics retailer, I think probably in the world, certainly in North America. And we're looking at supporting them with programmatic out-of-home and BVOD in their catchment areas. So it'll be a combination of programmatic TV, online video, programmatic out-of-home on screens right outside the Best Buys locations. So we're really excited to give that a try.
Absolutely. So it's doing what Sam was talking about
earlier.
Yeah. So sort of isolating audiences and everything. That's wonderful. Thank you. Best of luck with that as well. And also we have a case study that we can release to anybody who does want to follow up with anything that about that in a little bit more detail with us. So just let us know. Thank you, Scott. Bryan, over to you. So thank you. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us as well today. So same thing for you to begin with, if that's all right. Just if you wouldn't mind just giving everyone a little bit of an update on who Stake is and your role and your kind of current approach to paid media, and then we can sort of unpack that a little bit more.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me firstly. Great to be a part of the panel and have a bit of a chat. Yeah. So Stake is a digital shared trading platform, and ultimately our mission is to give people access to financial opportunities. We were founded in Australia in 2017, and at the time, and you know, for the past 4 years, our core focus has really been giving people amazing access to the US stock market. We pioneered $0 brokerage in Australia, and since we were founded here, we've also expanded to New Zealand, to the UK, and to Brazil as well. As I said, access to opportunity is really what we're all about, and so now sort of the next step for us. A big one that we've actually made the first step on today is we're launching an ASX trading product, which will give Australians access to ASX shares. Scott, you actually said Nuheara is a ASX listed company. So while you were talking, I went on to our beta, which launched today, to bought some shares. So I'll see you at the AGM. But you know, that's a really exciting next step for us, for our Australian customers. And you know, as we continue to grow and as we continue to expand globally as well, bringing more access to more opportunities. At Stake, I'm the CMO, so I work with the global teams, marketers, you know, brand marketers across different regions, growth marketers, performance marketers, sort of a wonderful team of really talented people that we've got. And look, we're a growth business. Number one focus is new customers. And within that, there's a number of different, you know, channels that we look at, whether that's a customer referral, working with affiliates, ambassadors, obviously paid and digital media is a really strong component. And then, you know, more recently, as we've grown and as, you know, we've had the privilege of having more budgets to play with, investing more heavily into the, you know, the bigger branding efforts as well.
Yeah, and so, you know, the same sort of question to you, probably a little bit more open-ended with you, but, you know, is around, you know, given the topics that we've spoken about today, because, you know, what it would be great really to get your view on what you have seen as the advantages of doing a lot of that kind of brand building via channels programmatically and the impact it's had on the business, and sort of just your approach and what you think the benefits are from doing that. I know we've touched on them, but I know that for you specifically, there's been a couple that have been really sort of pivotal in your approach. So if you kind of give us a little bit of a kind of an overview?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, my background is in creative agencies. Before moving to Stake, I was in advertising agencies, and so working as a brand strategist. So obviously, I have a lot of love for brand, and obviously, the marketing science supports the value of brand building. And brand building is effectively brand equity over time, and it's been shown that the benefits of not just that stream of activity for driving sustained growth, but also when you do run the short-term activations, if you've done a successful job of building that brand equity over time, those short-term activations and those performance efforts, to Scott's point, they will perform actually better as well, incrementally better in the long term.
Yeah.
So building brand equity, very important. What is brand equity? It's awareness and brand image. And to a lot of what Mark and Sam are touching on, building the awareness, brand awareness, really comes down to share of voice and how well you can sort of reach and frequency your target audience. I mean, market science sort of reiterates you should do as much of your addressable audience as possible, as much of the time. But I think, what's been an interesting experience for me at Stake is sort of twofold in terms of a challenge with going and doing that. The one is, budgets are sort of always a constraint. And when you're a new growing business, you don't have big budgets like a McDonald's might or a Samsung might to go and reach in frequency the whole addressable market all of the time. So you're a little bit constrained by budget. And then also, in our case specifically, when I sort of started at Stake, investing in retail investing was much more of a niche product. Today, and the changes that we've seen in the category has seen it become a lot more mainstream, and a lot more people are getting into the space, which is amazing. But when you're a niche product and you have limited budgets, how do you go and do those brand building objectives? And I think what's interesting about programmatic and building brand through programmatic channels is twofold. One is targeting, and the second one is connectivity. So from a targeting standpoint, to be able to really identify your audience, as we sort of touched on, but really go after, for us, looking at geographies, looking at demographics, looking at spending behaviors, all those sorts of things that you can feed into creating a really tight cohort, and then being super targeted around building brand within that demographic and within that audience is hugely beneficial. And then secondarily, on the connectivity piece, in terms of leveraging those brand building efforts further down funnel, to be able to then say, all right, well, I know that I've reached this cohort and I've done a job on awareness, or I've done a job of moving the brand image along, or whatever it might be, then I'm going to start seeing some effects when I want to go and convert that customer, to be able to really tightly just go, well, that's the group that we went and targeted, above the line. We're going to plug it in and go and convert them is kind of game changing.
Yeah, on that front, actually, that kind of ties nicely into the whole piece that we were talking around before, around connecting the dots. There's connecting the dots actually between channels themselves. And I know that, Sam touched on it when we talked about out of home, about some of the work that we did with you earlier in the year. But if do you want to sort of talk a little bit just around your approach there? Because I know that out of home was being used at that time as a brand builder, but we kind of added a little couple of extra layers that Programmatic brought to the party that I think really kind of helped to supercharge that and give you some insights as a business. So if you can unpack that a little bit, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really interesting case study, like a really innovative initiative, and it saw great results. So effectively what we did was, this was probably at the biggest campaign that we had run to date. It was beginning of 2021 in January. And we were effectively wanting to start to do more of that brand building effort. But of course, being a high growth business, there's always the focus on going, okay, well, what are the downstream impacts of that? So what we wanted to do was be very targeted with our out of home. So the approach that we took was really identifying lookalike audiences of our customers, and then analyzing their sort of movement patterns in the general world. So how often they were traveling to work, whether they were going to the gym. This was also during the transition of first lockdown, second lockdowns, new peaks and waves. And so all the new behaviors were still sort of quite confuddled. People were sort of going back to work, but also not going back to work. So being able to use Programmatic in a way to really target via day part, via geography, but, on a panel by panel and an hour by hour basis, really around that demographic, was really beneficial. But then what we also did was we took it, one step further, and we said, all right, let's see the impact of the people that we've reached through that channel, and see if we can do a better job of converting them downstream. And what we did was actually, completely anonymously, but captured device IDs that had come into close range with those out-of-home panels when our comms were showing. And then we used that audience in an A/B test, so a control group that weren't exposed to our ads, and then a test group that were. And we saw 54% increase in the install to actual account funding proportion or ratio. So, you know, that branding piece up front and having built that awareness clearly showing its dividends in terms of being able to convert the customer. Obviously, you still have to go through that step of the performance piece, but the impact that branding has down funnel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's underlying what you said, you know, your approach from earlier. So final question, because I know we're just a little bit over time, but so up and coming ASX launch, etc. I think the beta has gone live today, I believe. Yes, you think?
Yeah, today.
Yeah.
Woo,
so, you know, good there. Exciting times for you guys. So on that front, so, you know, to round off the whole sort of thing for us today, so we're talking about the importance of programmatic branding. You know, how important is it for that launch, and you know, what does the future plans looking like for you?
Yeah, so moving quickly post the beta into full launch, and then, you know, campaigning around that and wanting to, you know, raise as much awareness as we can and bring as many people into the product as possible. Look, I think that, you know, the principles remain the same. It's about building brand over the long term and then converting people that you've warmed and people that are primed to sort of use and convert into your product. I think what Programmatic continues to offer, and where we'll continue to utilize it, is on a number of different fronts. First one, the practical nature of the flexibility points that were touched on. And, you know, we're moving into this period of freedom where we're not sure how people are going to react exactly, or what consumer spending from a, you know, responsibility standpoint is going to be like, i.e. will people just go out for the next 3 months and be more concerned with socializing and reconnecting? And will they be that concerned with getting into the market and investing their money and things like that? You know, that's something that's on our minds. So, you know, a number of unknowns in the coming months. And so having the ability to be flexible around channel and spend. But additionally, as the competition increases in the category, for us, it's continuing to be smart about how we go to market, not just spending, you know, a point again that was raised earlier. And so programmatic really allows us to be much more clever in terms of how we access our audience and drive the behaviors that we want.
Yeah, I suppose you'll be trying to understand what the hooks of putting people in might change slightly as behaviors change, right? Because no one's
exactly
sitting at home worrying about their money.
And a number of different
which is good for all of us, which is good. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you, Bryan, and thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mark, and Sam as well. That's the end of the session. We have gone over. Thank you guys for staying with us. If you want to get in touch, have any questions, have any kind of comments or anything from today's session, please get in touch with us at accounts@benchmedia.com.